The flames from my backyard fire pit danced against the darkening Texas sky, casting warm shadows across the patio as I flipped burgers on the grill, completely unaware that my peaceful Saturday evening was about to turn into an absolute circus. I had moved to the Cedar Grove community in Austin about 6 months ago, right after my retirement from the police academy, where I had spent 23 years training new officers. My name is Kevin Daniels, and at 52, I thought I had earned the right to enjoy a simple campfire in my own backyard without drama. The fire pit was a proper commercial-grade model, sitting on a concrete pad at least 30 feet from any structure, surrounded by a rock barrier and equipped with a fire screen. I had checked the local ordinances twice before installing it. Everything was legal and safe. The burgers were almost done when I heard the sharp clicking of high heels on pavement. I turned to see a woman in her mid-40s marching across my lawn with the kind of determined stride that spoke of impending confrontation. She wore white capri pants despite the evening hour, a floral blouse that probably cost more than my grill, and an expression that could curdle milk. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice shrill enough to make my neighbor's dog start barking. "Excuse me, sir, do you have any idea what you are doing right now?" I set down my spatula and walked toward the fence line, keeping my expression neutral. 23 years of dealing with difficult people had taught me the value of staying calm. "Evening, madam. I'm Kevin, just having a cookout. Can I help you with something?" "Help me." Her voice went up an octave. "You can help the entire neighborhood by putting out that enormous bonfire immediately. I'm Patricia Hendrickson, president of the Cedar Grove Homeowners Association, and what you are doing is completely unacceptable." I glanced back at my modest fire pit. The flames were maybe 18 inches high, carefully contained with a proper mesh screen in place. Calling it a bonfire was like calling a kiddie pool an Olympic swimming facility. "Madam, this is a standard fire pit." I checked the Austin city ordinances before I installed it. There's no burn ban in effect, and I'm following all safety protocols. Patricia's face flushed red, visible even in the fading light. "I don't care about city ordinances. The HOA covenant clearly states that open flames are prohibited in residential yards. Section 12, paragraph 4, subsection B. Actually," I said, keeping my tone even, "I read through the entire covenant before I purchased this home. That section refers to leaving grills unattended or burning household trash. Recreational fire pits are explicitly permitted as long as they meet safety standards, which mine does." "Are you arguing with me?" Patricia's hands went to her hips. "I have been the president of this HOA for 7 years, and I think I know what our rules say better than some newcomer who just moved in last week." 6 months ago, I corrected gently. "And I'm not arguing, just stating what's written in the covenant. I've got a copy inside if you'd like to review it together." Her eyes narrowed. "What I would like is for you to extinguish that fire immediately before I call the authorities. You're creating a safety hazard and disturbing the entire neighborhood with your smoke." I looked around at the dozen or so houses visible from my yard. No smoke was billowing anywhere. The dry wood I was burning produced minimal smoke, and what little there was drifted straight up in the still evening air. Not a single neighbor was outside complaining or even looking concerned. In fact, I had specifically chosen this evening because the wind was calm, ensuring any smoke would dissipate quickly. "Madam, with all due respect, there is no safety hazard here. The fire pit is professionally installed, properly maintained, and I'm actively supervising it. I'm not breaking any laws or HOA rules." Patricia pulled out her phone. "We'll see what the police have to say about that. This is exactly the kind of reckless behavior that ruins property values and puts families at risk. I almost laughed but managed to keep a straight face. Reckless behavior. This woman had clearly never seen actual reckless behavior. You're welcome to call the police if you feel it's necessary. I'm confident they'll confirm everything is in order. Oh, I'm calling them right now, she said, already dialing. And then I'm filing a formal complaint with the HOA board. You'll be receiving a fine in the mail within the week. I walked back to my grill, flipped the burgers onto a plate, and adjusted the fire screen. Behind me, I could hear Patricia speaking in her most dramatic voice to the emergency dispatcher, describing my dangerous bonfire as if I were trying to burn down the entire subdivision. She used words like massive flames and threatening and refuses to comply. It was almost impressive how she could twist reality into something unrecognizable. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in my patio chair, eating a burger, when I saw the red and blue lights pull up in front of my house. Patricia was still standing at the edge of my property, arms crossed, looking triumphant. 2 officers got out of the patrol car and walked around to my backyard gate. "Evening, officers," I called out. "Gate's unlocked. Come on in." The first officer through the gate was young, maybe late 20s, with the kind of fresh face that marked him as relatively new to the force. The second officer was older, probably in his late 30s, and something about his walk seemed familiar. As he got closer and the porch light hit his face, recognition sparked in my brain. "Officer Marcus Webb," I said, a smile breaking across my face. "I'll be damned." Marcus stopped mid-stride, his professional expression cracking into surprise. "Sergeant Daniels, Kevin Daniels." "Retired now, but yeah, it's me." Marcus turned to his partner with a grin. "Ryan, this is the guy I've been telling you about. Best defensive tactics instructor the academy ever had. He's the reason I survived my first year on the street." The younger officer, Ryan, looked between us with obvious surprise. Patricia made an irritated noise from the fence line. "Excuse me, officers. I didn't call you here for a reunion. This man is operating an illegal bonfire and refusing to put it out." Marcus held up a hand. "Madam, we'll handle this. Why don't you wait by the fence while we assess the situation?" He walked over to my fire pit, examined it thoroughly, checked the distance from the house and other structures, and looked at the fire screen and safety features. "Kevin, you got your permits?" Fire pit was installed by Austin Outdoor Living, fully permitted and inspected. "I've got all the paperwork inside. Also, there's no burn ban currently in effect, and I checked the HOA covenant before I ever lit a match." Marcus nodded, pulling out a small notepad. "Mind if I take a look at the documents?" "Not at all. Come on inside." Patricia protested loudly as Marcus and I walked into my house, but Officer Ryan stayed outside to keep an eye on things. I pulled out the folder I kept with all my home documentation and showed Marcus the installation permit, the inspection certificate, and my highlighted copy of the HOA covenant showing where recreational fire pits were specifically addressed. Marcus photographed each document with his phone. "This is perfect, Kevin. You've got everything in order, way more documentation than most people would have." He paused, then grinned. "Though I'm not surprised. You always taught us to document everything." "Cover your assets," I said, using the phrase I had repeated hundreds of times to academy recruits. "Someone always wants to make an issue out of nothing." "Speaking of which," Marcus said as we headed back outside, "what's the deal with your HOA president?" "She made it sound like you were trying to burn down the neighborhood." "First time I've ever spoken to her. I've been here 6 months without a single problem. Tonight, I'm grilling burgers and she storms over demanding I put out my fire pit, claiming it's illegal. When I explained it wasn't, she threatened to fine me and called you guys. Marcus shook his head. Some people have too much time on their hands. Back in the yard, Patricia was pacing impatiently while Ryan examined the fire pit from a respectful distance. When she saw us emerge, she rushed over. "Well, are you going to cite him for the fire code violations?" "Madam," Marcus said in his professional voice, "there are no fire code violations. The fire pit is properly installed with all required permits and inspections. The homeowner is in full compliance with Austin City ordinances, state fire safety laws, and his HOA covenant." Patricia's mouth fell open. "That's impossible. The HOA covenant specifically prohibits open flames." "I've seen the covenant, madam. Section 12, paragraph 4, subsection B allows recreational fire pits as long as they meet safety standards. This one does. But the smoke, the danger to children, the property values, there's minimal smoke," Marcus interrupted, his patience clearly wearing thin. "The fire is contained and supervised, and there's no danger to anyone. This is a completely legal recreational fire." "This is unacceptable." Patricia's voice reached a new pitch. "I am the HOA president, and I'm telling you this violates our community standards. You need to make him put it out right now." "Madam," Ryan spoke up for the first time, "we respond to legal violations, not HOA preferences. If you have an issue with the covenant interpretation, that's a civil matter between you and the homeowner. There's nothing here requiring police action." Patricia's face went from red to nearly purple. "So you're just going to let him do whatever he wants? Is that how the Austin Police Department operates now? Ignoring concerned citizens?" Marcus's expression hardened. "Madam, we take every call seriously, which is why we responded and conducted a thorough investigation. The investigation shows no violations. We've done our job. If you continue to make false reports, you could be charged with misuse of emergency services." "False reports? How dare you?" "I'm trying to protect this neighborhood, and you're threatening me." "I'm not threatening anyone," Marcus said calmly. "I'm informing you of the law. Making knowingly false reports to police is a crime. You reported a dangerous bonfire and fire code violations. Neither of those things exist. The homeowner has a small, legal fire pit that poses no threat to anyone." Patricia turned to me, her eyes blazing. "This isn't over. The HOA board will hear about this, and you will receive a fine. We don't tolerate troublemakers in Cedar Grove." "Madam," I said, keeping my voice level despite my growing annoyance, "I'm not a troublemaker. I'm a retired police training instructor enjoying a burger in my own backyard. If you issue a fine for something that's explicitly permitted in the covenant, I'll have no choice but to challenge it." "Challenge it all you want. We'll see what the board says." She spun on her heel and marched off, her high heels clicking angrily against the sidewalk. After she left, Marcus and Ryan lingered for a few minutes. Ryan was curious about my time at the academy, and we ended up talking about training methods and some of the changes that had been implemented since my retirement. Marcus shared a few stories about situations where my defensive tactics training had saved his skin, including one incident where he had to subdue a suspect twice his size using the joint manipulation techniques I had drilled into every recruit. "You saved my life that day," Marcus said seriously. "If I hadn't remembered your voice in my head saying never meet force with force, redirect it, I probably would have tried to muscle the guy and gotten myself hurt." "You saved your own life by paying attention during training," I replied. "A lot of recruits just go through the motions." "You always took it seriously." Before they left, Marcus gave me his card. "If this HOA president gives you any more trouble, give me a call. I can't do anything official about civil disputes, but I can provide a statement about tonight's events if you need it." Appreciate it, Marcus. And it was good seeing you. Tell everyone at the academy I said hello. Will do, Sergeant. Take care. After they left, I sat back down by my fire pit and finished my now cold burger. The fire crackled peacefully, and the stars were starting to emerge in the darkening sky. It should have been a perfect evening, but Patricia's visit had left a sour taste that had nothing to do with the food. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the Cedar Grove HOA. Inside was a notice of violation and a fine for $500. The letter claimed I had violated Section 12, Paragraph 4, Subsection B of the Covenant by operating an illegal open flame device. It demanded payment within 30 days and stated that failure to comply would result in additional fines and potential legal action. I read the letter 3 times, my anger building with each pass. The wording was deliberately misleading, citing the exact section that actually permitted my fire pit, but twisting the interpretation to make it sound like a violation. At the bottom of the letter, Patricia's signature was scrawled in aggressive strokes, along with 2 other board member signatures I didn't recognize. I spent the next day crafting a detailed response. I cited the specific language in the covenant, included photographs of my fire pit installation, attached copies of all permits and inspections, and referenced the police report from the night Patricia called 911. I made copies of everything and sent the response via certified mail to Patricia and each board member individually. 2 weeks passed with no response from the HOA. I continued using my fire pit normally, though I'll admit I was more aware of my surroundings, half expecting Patricia to appear at any moment with new complaints. She didn't show up, but I noticed her driving slowly past my house several times, always slowing down to look at my backyard. Then I got a call from my next-door neighbor, an elderly man named George who had lived in Cedar Grove for 15 years. "Kevin, I thought you should know Patricia is going around the neighborhood trying to get signatures on a petition against you." "A petition for what?" "She's claiming you're operating a commercial fire pit business out of your house, causing noise disturbances and threatening property values. She wants the HOA to take legal action to force you to remove the fire pit entirely." I thanked George for the information and immediately started documenting everything. I took photographs of my fire pit from multiple angles, showing its modest size and proper safety features. I wrote down every date and time I had used it, along with what activities took place. The most frequent use was me sitting alone reading a book or cooking dinner. Hardly a commercial operation or noise disturbance. A week later, I received another certified letter. This one informed me that the HOA board had voted to escalate enforcement action due to my continued violations and failure to remit payment. The fine had increased to $1,500, and the letter stated that if I didn't comply within 2 weeks, they would file a lawsuit to force compliance and place a lien on my property. That's when I decided to fight back properly. I contacted a real estate attorney named Jennifer Morrison who specialized in HOA disputes. Jennifer was in her 40s, sharp as a tack, and had a reputation for not backing down from bullies. During our first meeting, I laid out everything that had happened, showed her all the documentation, and explained about Marcus's visit. Jennifer reviewed everything carefully, occasionally nodding or making notes. When she finished, she looked up with a slight smile. "Mr. Daniels, this is one of the most well-documented cases I've seen. You've done everything right. The HOA, on the other hand, has made several serious mistakes, such as, first, they're attempting to enforce a rule that doesn't exist by misrepresenting the covenant language. That's actionable. Second, They've increased the fine without following proper escalation procedures outlined in their own bylaws. Third, the petition your neighbor mentioned could constitute harassment if it contains false information. And fourth, she leaned forward, threatening a property lien for a non-existent violation opens them up to significant liability. So what do? We send them a letter explaining exactly how badly they've screwed up, giving them one chance to withdraw all fines and penalties. If they don't, we sue them for harassment, abuse of authority, and attorney's fees. Jennifer's letter was a thing of beauty. 5 pages of legal terminology that essentially said, "You're wrong, your position is indefensible, withdraw everything now or face serious consequences." She sent it to Patricia and all board members via certified mail with return receipt requested. 3 days later, my phone rang at 8 in the morning. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Is this Kevin Daniels?" a woman's voice asked. "Not Patricia, someone older." "Speaking." "This is Margaret Chen. I'm a board member of the Cedar Grove HOA. I'm calling about the situation with your fire pit. I need to apologize on behalf of the board. Most of us had no idea Patricia was pursuing this the way she has been. That was unexpected. Go on." "Patricia showed us heavily edited versions of the covenant at our meetings, claiming your fire pit violated our rules. She never showed us the actual section that permits recreational fire pits. When we received your attorney's letter yesterday, I went back and read the covenant myself." "You're absolutely right. You haven't violated anything." "I appreciate you saying that, Miss Chen. Does this mean the fines are being withdrawn?" "That's what I wanted to discuss. I've been talking with the other board members, the ones Patricia didn't manipulate. We're calling an emergency board meeting tonight to address this situation. Would you be willing to attend?" I thought about it. Part of me wanted to let Jennifer handle everything through legal channels, but another part, the instructor part that had spent 2 decades teaching conflict resolution, saw an opportunity. "Will Patricia be there?" She's required to be as president. "But Mr. Daniels, you should know that several of us are planning to call for her removal from the board tonight." "In that case, yes, I'll attend. What time?" The emergency meeting was held at the Cedar Grove Community Center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that apparently hosted all official HOA gatherings. When I arrived at 7 o'clock, there were already a dozen cars in the parking lot. Jennifer had offered to come with me, but I decided to go alone. If this was really going to be resolved tonight, I didn't want to escalate things by bringing my attorney. Inside, the community center was set up with a long table at the front where 5 board members sat, and several rows of chairs facing them for residents. Patricia sat in the center chair, looking confident and composed. She was wearing another expensive outfit, this one a navy blazer and cream blouse combination that screamed authority. Margaret Chen sat 2 seats to her left, along with 3 other board members I didn't know. About 20 residents were scattered through the audience chairs. I recognized George from next door and a few other faces from around the neighborhood. I took a seat in the back row. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel. "This emergency session of the Cedar Grove HOA Board has been called to address ongoing covenant violations by a resident. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that this is a formal proceeding and all comments must be recognized by the chair." Margaret raised her hand immediately. "Point of order, Madam President. This meeting was not called to address resident violations. It was called to address board misconduct." Patricia's confident expression cracked slightly. "I'm sorry, what? You heard me correctly. This meeting is about your conduct as president, specifically your harassment of Mr. Kevin Daniels, and your misrepresentation of HOA covenant terms to other board members." A murmur ran through the audience. Patricia's face flushed. "That is completely inappropriate. You can't hijack an official meeting to make baseless accusations." Another board member, a man in his 50s with silver hair, spoke up. "Patricia, Margaret is right. We called this meeting after receiving a letter from Mr. Daniels's attorney outlining serious concerns about how you've handled this situation. We need to address it." "Robert, I'm handling a covenant violation according to established procedures. There's nothing to address." Margaret stood up, holding a thick document. "Patricia, this is the HOA covenant, the actual, complete covenant, not the selective quotes you've been showing us. Section 12, paragraph 4, subsection B explicitly allows recreational fire pits. Mr. Daniels is in full compliance." "You've been lying to us." "I have not been lying. I interpreted the covenant. You misrepresented it," Robert interrupted. "There's a difference between interpretation and deliberately hiding relevant information. You showed us subsection about unattended grills and trash burning, but you never mentioned subsection B that permits fire pits." "Why?" Patricia set down her gavel with a sharp crack. "Because that subsection is outdated. It doesn't account for modern safety concerns or the impact on property values. As president, I have the authority to update enforcement standards." "No," said Margaret firmly, "you don't. The president can't unilaterally change covenant terms. That requires a vote of the membership. You know that." I raised my hand. Patricia glared at me but nodded curtly. "Mr. Daniels, you may speak." I stood up so everyone could see me. "Thank you. I want to make sure I understand the situation correctly. Miss Hendrickson issued fines totaling $1,500 for violating a rule that doesn't exist, then threatened to place a lien on my property if I didn't pay. She also apparently started a petition full of false claims about my activities. Is that accurate?" "That's one interpretation," Patricia snapped. "My interpretation is that I was protecting the neighborhood from a potential safety hazard that you arrogantly refuse to address." "There is no safety hazard. The Austin Police Department confirmed that. My fire pit is professionally installed, fully permitted, and maintained according to all applicable safety standards. You called 911 and made false statements to the dispatcher about a dangerous bonfire. The responding officers found no violations of any kind." A woman in the front row raised her hand. Patricia ignored her, but Margaret said, "Yes, Susan. I just want to say that I live 4 houses down from Mr. Daniels and I've seen his fire pit. It's lovely and very safe looking. Patricia came to my house with that petition and told me he was running some kind of business with constant parties and noise. I haven't heard any noise from his property ever." Another resident spoke up. "She told me he was burning trash and creating toxic smoke. She said he refused to follow police orders," someone else added. The murmurs grew louder as more residents shared what Patricia had told them. With each statement, it became clearer that Patricia hadn't just misinterpreted rules. She had launched a systematic campaign of misinformation against me. Patricia banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order! This is getting out of hand. Yes, I spoke to neighbors about the situation. That's part of my job as president, to keep residents informed about covenant violations." "Except there is no violation," Margaret said. "Patricia, you've abused your position. You've harassed a resident, issued illegal fines, made false statements to police, and lied to the board and the community. I'm formally moving that you be removed as president effective immediately, and that all fines against Mr. Daniels be withdrawn and apologized for." "Second," Robert said instantly. Patricia's composed facade shattered. "You can't do this. I've been president for 7 years. I've kept this neighborhood pristine, maintained property values, and enforced standards that kept Cedar Grove from becoming just another trashy subdivision. And you're going to remove me over one person who won't follow the rules. He is following the rules, Margaret said. That's the point. You decided you didn't like what he was doing, so you made up violations to punish him. That's not leadership, Patricia. That's abuse of power. The vote was 4-1. Patricia was the only vote against her own removal. She stood up, her hands shaking with rage. Fine. You want to turn this neighborhood into a free-for-all where people do whatever they want. Be my guest. But don't come crying to me when property values tank and Cedar Grove becomes a laughingstock. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The remaining board members looked at each other in awkward silence. Margaret turned to me. Mr. Daniels, on behalf of the Cedar Grove HOA board, I sincerely apologize for how you've been treated. The fines against you are hereby withdrawn and voided. We'll send you a formal letter confirming that within the week. I appreciate that, I said. But I have to ask, how did this go on for so long? Were there other situations like this? Robert grimaced. Probably. Patricia ran the board like her personal fiefdom. Most of us only attended quarterly meetings and trusted her to handle day-to-day issues. Clearly, that was a mistake. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to apologize for believing Patricia's stories. George clapped me on the shoulder. Sorry about all this, Kevin. I should have known something was off when she was collecting signatures. Patricia always had a way of making everything sound urgent and critical. No hard feelings, I told him. You all were operating on the information you had. Margaret walked over as the crowd dispersed. Mr. Daniels, I hope this resolves everything. If you incurred any legal fees because of this situation, please submit the invoices to the board. The HOA will cover them. That's generous, but not necessary. My attorney barely did any work before this got resolved. Still, it's the right thing to do, and again, I'm sorry. Patricia had us all fooled. I drove home that night feeling vindicated but also oddly unsatisfied. Patricia had been removed from the board, but she was still a resident of Cedar Grove. She still lived 6 houses down from me. And based on her reaction tonight, I doubted she was going to let this go quietly. I was right to be concerned. The next morning, I woke up to find my mailbox had been knocked over during the night. The post was cracked, and the box itself was dented like someone had hit it with a bat. I walked around my property and found 2 of my outdoor solar lights had been smashed. I called the police non-emergency number and filed a report, making sure to mention the HOA situation in case it became relevant. A different officer came out, took photos, and gave me a case number. Probably teenagers, he said. We get a lot of mailbox baseball this time of year. Maybe, but I had my doubts. 2 nights later, someone egged my house. 4 eggs splattered across my front door and windows, the yolks drying hard in the Texas heat. Again, I filed a police report. Again, the officer suggested teenagers. I installed security cameras the next day. 4 high-definition cameras with night vision, motion detection, and cloud storage. I positioned them to cover my driveway, front door, backyard, and the side yard where my fire pit was located. 3 nights after installing the cameras, they caught someone. At 2:15 in the morning, a figure dressed in dark clothing and a baseball cap crept into my backyard. The motion sensors activated, and the cameras recorded everything in crystal clear detail as the person grabbed my fire screen and threw it into the bushes, then used a garden shovel to scatter the decorative rocks around my fire pit across the lawn. The vandal's face was partially obscured by the cap and darkness, but when she turned toward the camera, Adjusting her cap, the infrared picked up enough detail. It was Patricia. I downloaded the footage and called the police. This time I asked specifically for Marcus Webb. When he arrived an hour later, I showed him the video on my laptop. Marcus watched it twice, his expression growing more serious. That's definitely her. You can see her face clearly at the 40-second mark. Kevin, this is criminal mischief, possibly escalating to stalking given the pattern of incidents. What's the next step? I need to take this footage as evidence. We'll file formal charges. Given that she's identifiable and you have a clear motive established through the HOA conflict, the DA will likely prosecute. Do you want to press charges? I thought about Patricia, her anger at the board meeting, her conviction that she had done nothing wrong. Part of me felt bad for her. She had spent 7 years as HOA president, probably believing she was protecting the neighborhood, and it had all collapsed in one night. But sympathy only went so far. She had harassed me, lied about me, and now she was vandalizing my property. Yes, I want to press charges. Marcus nodded. I'll start the paperwork. We'll probably pick her up later today. You'll need to come down to the station to give a formal statement. I'll be there. Patricia was arrested that afternoon. I heard about it from George, who saw the police car in her driveway. The neighborhood gossip chain went into overdrive. Some people were shocked. Others said they weren't surprised, that Patricia had always been intense about HOA matters, and this was just an extension of that intensity taken too far. The case moved through the system faster than I expected. Patricia was charged with 3 counts of criminal mischief and 1 count of stalking. Her attorney tried to argue that the vandalism was done by someone else, and that Patricia was being targeted because of the HOA conflict, but my security footage was damning. At one point, Patricia looked directly at the camera, her face fully visible, before continuing to scatter the rocks. The stalking charge came from the pattern of behavior. The false police report, the harassment through HOA fines, the misinformation campaign, and then the escalation to property damage. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Diana Fuentes, argued that Patricia had engaged in a systematic campaign to intimidate and harass me, and the vandalism represented a dangerous escalation. Patricia's attorney negotiated a plea deal. Patricia would plead guilty to 2 counts of criminal mischief in exchange for the stalking charge being dropped. She would pay restitution for all damages, perform 100 hours of community service, attend anger management counseling, and remain on probation for 2 years. Any violation of probation would result in jail time. I attended the hearing where Patricia entered her plea. She looked different, smaller somehow, without her expensive clothes and commanding presence. She wore a simple gray dress and kept her eyes down as the judge asked if she understood the charges and the plea agreement. "Yes, Your Honor," she said quietly. "Miss Hendrickson, do you understand that this plea will result in a criminal record?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you understand the terms of your probation, including the requirement to have no contact with Mr. Daniels?" "Yes, Your Honor." The judge accepted the plea and sentenced Patricia according to the agreement. As she was led out of the courtroom, Patricia glanced at me once. There was no anger in her eyes anymore, just exhaustion and something that might have been regret. After the hearing, Deanna approached me. "Mr. Daniels, I want you to know that we took this case seriously because of the escalating pattern. People often think HOA disputes are just civil matters, but when someone starts committing crimes, it crosses a line. You did the right thing by documenting everything and pressing charges." "I just wanted to use my fire pit in peace," I said. "Well, you should be able to now. The no-contact order is very clear. If she violates it, call us immediately." Life slowly returned to normal after that. I replaced my mailbox and solar lights. I fixed the scattered rocks around my fire pit. The security cameras stayed up, and I checked the footage regularly for the first few weeks, but nothing else happened. The Cedar Grove HOA elected new leadership. Margaret became president, and Robert took over as treasurer. They sent out a newsletter to all residents explaining what had happened with Patricia, apologizing for the board's oversight, and promising new transparency measures. They also clarified the rules about fire pits, outdoor cooking, and other commonly misunderstood covenant terms. I started using my fire pit again regularly. It felt good to sit out there in the evening, watching the flames dance while I read or just enjoyed the peace. Sometimes neighbors would stop by, drawn by the glow of the fire, and we'd chat about nothing in particular. George became a regular visitor, often bringing beer and stories about the neighborhood's history. Marcus Webb stopped by one evening about a month after Patricia's sentencing. He was off duty, and I invited him to sit by the fire. We cracked open a couple of beers and talked about his work, my retirement, and the whole mess with Patricia. "You know," Marcus said, "I've been thinking about something you taught us at the academy. You always said that power without accountability turns good people into bad ones." "That's what happened with Patricia, right?" "Probably," I agreed. "She had unchecked authority over the HOA for 7 years. Nobody questioned her decisions or asked to see her work. She convinced herself that she was protecting the neighborhood, and when someone challenged her, she couldn't handle it. It's sad, really. She threw away her reputation, got a criminal record, and destroyed relationships with her neighbors, all because she couldn't let go of being in control." "That's the thing about control," I said. "The tighter you grip, the more it slips away." Marcus stayed for another hour before heading home. After he left, I sat alone by the fire, thinking about everything that had happened. It had been 3 months since that first evening when Patricia stormed across my lawn, outraged by my perfectly legal fire pit. 3 months of conflict, documentation, legal maneuvering, and finally resolution. The fire crackled peacefully, sending sparks drifting up toward the stars. The night was quiet except for crickets and the occasional car passing on the main road. This was what I had wanted when I retired, what I had looked forward to during those long years training officers and dealing with the constant stress of academy life. Peace. Simplicity. The freedom to enjoy my own property without anyone looking over my shoulder. I thought about calling Jennifer Morrison to thank her again for her help, even though she had barely had to do anything. Her letter had been enough to crack open the truth about Patricia's behavior. Sometimes the threat of legal action is more effective than the action itself. The neighborhood changed after Patricia's removal. It was subtle at first, but gradually I noticed people were friendlier, more relaxed. There were more kids playing outside, more neighbors chatting in driveways. It was as if Patricia's removal had lifted a weight from the community, allowing everyone to breathe easier. George told me that Patricia had put her house up for sale. "Can't really blame her," he said. "After everything that happened, staying here would be torture. Everyone knows what she did." "Where's she moving?" "Heard she's got family in Dallas, probably going to start over there." I felt a twinge of sympathy despite everything. Starting over in your 40s after destroying your reputation isn't easy, but Patricia had made her choices, and choices have consequences. That's something I had taught hundreds of recruits over the years. You're responsible for your actions, good or bad. A week later, I saw the moving truck in Patricia's driveway. I considered walking down there, maybe offering some kind of parting words, but decided against it. The no-contact order was still in effect, and beyond that, I couldn't think of anything to say that would matter. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. The new family that bought Patricia's house was young, maybe early 30s, with two small kids. They introduced themselves as David and Rachel Emerson. David worked in tech, Rachel was a nurse, and their kids were adorable bundles of energy named Sophie and Lucas. "We heard there was some drama with the previous owner," Rachel said cautiously when they came by to introduce themselves. "Something about the HOA, ancient history," I told them. "The board's under new management now and everything's running smoothly. You'll like it here." And they did. Within weeks, the Emerson kids were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying through the neighborhood. David set up a basketball hoop in their driveway, and soon other neighborhood kids were coming over for pickup games. Rachel started a community garden club that met monthly to share plants and gardening tips. Life in Cedar Grove continued, better than before. Margaret proved to be an excellent HOA president, balancing necessary rules with common sense and always willing to listen to residents' concerns. The board started holding open meetings where anyone could attend and voice opinions. Transparency replaced secrecy, and cooperation replaced confrontation. I continued my retirement routine. Morning coffee on the patio, afternoon projects around the house, evenings by the fire pit. Sometimes I'd invite Marcus over for dinner, and we'd talk about police work and training methods. He was interested in becoming a training instructor himself eventually, and I gave him advice on what to expect and how to prepare. Other former students started reaching out too, after Marcus spread the word about where I was living. I'd get calls from officers I had trained 5, 10, even 15 years ago, checking in or asking for advice on situations they were dealing with. It was gratifying to know that my work had made a lasting impact, that the lessons I had taught continued to help people long after they left the academy. One evening, about 4 months after the whole situation had resolved, I was sitting by my fire pit when Margaret knocked on my gate. "Kevin, do you have a minute?" "Sure, come on in. Want a beer?" "I'd love one, thanks." We sat in the glow of the fire, and Margaret was quiet for a moment before speaking. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you did. When you challenged Patricia's fines, you exposed problems that had been building for years. If you had just paid the fine and moved on, she'd still be running the board like a dictator, and we'd all still be walking on eggshells trying not to upset her." "I just stood up for myself," I said. "Nothing heroic about it." "Maybe not, but it took courage, especially since you were new to the neighborhood and didn't have relationships here yet. You could have decided it wasn't worth the fight and just gotten rid of the fire pit. That wouldn't have been right. The covenant explicitly allowed it. Giving in to a bully just encourages more bullying." Margaret smiled. "See, that's exactly what I mean. You have principles and you stuck to them. The neighborhood is better for it." She paused, took a sip of beer. "Actually, I came by to ask you something. The board is looking for new members. We have 2 vacant seats and your name came up. Would you be interested in joining?" I considered it. Being on the HOA board meant meetings, emails, disputes, and all the bureaucratic headaches I had just escaped from. But it also meant having a voice in how the community was run, ensuring that what happened with Patricia didn't happen again. "Let me think about it," I said. "When do you need an answer?" "Next board meeting is in 2 weeks. Let me know before then." After Margaret left, I spent several days thinking about her offer. I talked to George about it, called Jennifer Morrison for her perspective, and even discussed it with Marcus during one of our dinners. "You'd be good at it," Marcus said. "You know how to lead without being a dictator, how to enforce rules fairly, and how to deal with difficult people. Plus, after everything that happened, residents would trust you to keep the board honest." But I retired specifically to get away from managing people and dealing with politics. True, But this is different. This is your community, your home. Don't you want a say in how it's run?" He had a point. I had spent 23 years teaching others how to serve their communities. Maybe it was time to practice what I preached. I called Margaret the next day and accepted the position. 2 weeks later, I attended my first board meeting as an official member. It was surprisingly normal, discussing mundane things like landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules. Nothing dramatic, nothing controversial. Just neighbors working together to maintain a community. Over the next few months, I settled into the role. I volunteered to chair the Architectural Review Committee, which handled requests for exterior home modifications. It was detailed work, requiring knowledge of the covenant and an eye for what would benefit the community versus what would create problems. I enjoyed it more than I expected. One of my first decisions on the committee was approving another resident's request to install a fire pit nearly identical to mine. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. George joked that I should start a fire pit installation business and become the very thing Patricia had falsely accused me of being. The community continued to thrive. Property values increased, not because of strict enforcement, but because Cedar Grove became known as a friendly, well-maintained neighborhood with reasonable leadership. New families moved in, drawn by the reputation. The community center started hosting more events like summer barbecues and holiday parties. People actually wanted to be involved in neighborhood activities instead of avoiding them. I ran into Officer Ryan one day at the grocery store. He was off duty, shopping with his wife. "Hey, Mr. Daniels. How's life in Cedar Grove?" "Peaceful, finally, and call me Kevin. Marcus told me you joined the HOA board. That's great. Neighborhood could use someone with your experience. We'll see how it goes. So far, it's mostly discussing paint colors and lawn care." Ryan laughed. "That's probably a good sign. The exciting HOA meetings are usually the bad ones." "No kidding. I've had enough excitement to last me a while." As I drove home that day, I thought about how much had changed since that evening when Patricia first confronted me about my fire pit. What had started as a simple desire to grill burgers and enjoy my backyard had snowballed into conflict, legal action, and ultimately transformation of the entire HOA leadership. Sometimes I wondered if Patricia ever reflected on what had happened, whether she regretted her choices or blamed everyone else for not understanding her vision. I hoped she had found peace in Dallas, that she was building a new life and learning from her mistakes. But I didn't know, and the no-contact order meant I never would. That evening I lit my fire pit as usual. The flames caught quickly, dry wood crackling and popping as the fire grew. I settled into my chair with a book, but I didn't open it right away. Instead, I just sat there, enjoying the warmth and the peaceful night. David Emerson walked by with his kids on their evening stroll. "Evening, Kevin. Nice fire." "Thanks. You guys want to stop by for s'mores later? I've got all the supplies." Sophie's eyes went wide. "Can we, Dad, please?" David grinned. "Sure, we'll swing by in about an hour after the kids' bath time." They showed up right on schedule, kids in pajamas, ready for marshmallows. Rachel came too, and George wandered over when he smelled the chocolate. We sat around the fire pit, roasting marshmallows and talking about nothing important. The kids ran around the yard with sparklers, their laughter bright in the darkness. This was what community was supposed to be, I thought. People gathering together, sharing simple pleasures, looking out for each other. Not rules for the sake of rules or power for the sake of power, but genuine human connection. Marcus called the next day. "Hey, Kevin, I'm teaching a defensive tactics class next week for some rookie officers. Would you be willing to come guest lecture? They'd love to meet the legendary Sergeant Daniels." I don't know about legendary, but sure, I'll come talk to them. Great. And hey, the Academy is hosting a retirement dinner next month for Captain Rodriguez. You should come. Everyone would love to see you. I marked the date on my calendar. It felt good to stay connected to the Academy, to the work I had dedicated so much of my life to. Retirement didn't mean disappearing. It meant transitioning to a new phase while maintaining the relationships and values that mattered. The guest lecture went well. 20 fresh-faced recruits listened intently as I demonstrated techniques and shared stories from my years of training. Afterward, several came up to ask questions, their eagerness reminding me of why I had loved the work. These were people choosing to serve their communities, to put themselves in danger to protect others. They deserved the best training possible. Marcus walked me to my car after the session. That was perfect, Kevin, exactly what they needed. Would you consider doing this regularly? Maybe once a month, you sure? I'm retired, remember. Don't want to step on anyone's toes. Are you kidding? Everyone at the Academy respects you. Having you come in periodically would be a huge asset. Plus, it keeps you sharp. I agreed to monthly sessions. It gave structure to my retirement and kept me connected to work I valued. But it also made me appreciate my free time more, the days when I could work on home projects or read by the fire pit without any obligations. The Cedar Grove HOA board meeting that month included a discussion about hosting a neighborhood safety night. Margaret suggested inviting local police to talk about home security and crime prevention. I volunteered to coordinate it, using my law enforcement connections. The safety night was a huge success. Marcus and several other officers came, along with a K-9 unit that the kids loved. They demonstrated various safety techniques, answered questions, and helped residents feel more connected to local law enforcement. Over 100 residents attended, filling the community center to capacity. After the presentation, a resident named Tom approached me. Kevin, this was fantastic. We should do more events like this. Maybe a CPR training course or a neighborhood watch program. Those are great ideas, Tom. Want to head up a safety committee? Absolutely. Let's do it. Cedar Grove continued evolving into a genuinely engaged community. The safety committee organized monthly training sessions. The garden club expanded to include a food bank donation program. Someone started a book club that met at the community center. These weren't mandated HOA activities, but organic initiatives from residents who felt empowered to contribute. 1 year after the fire pit incident, I sat in my backyard on a warm spring evening, watching flames dance in the pit that had caused so much trouble. It seemed absurd now that something so simple and innocent had sparked such conflict. But it had also been a catalyst for positive change, forcing a community to examine its leadership and values. George came by with a 6-pack. "Anniversary present," he said, handing me a beer. "1 year since Patricia's meltdown. We should celebrate." Is it weird to celebrate someone else's downfall? We're not celebrating that. We're celebrating what came after. Cedar Grove is a better place now because you didn't back down. We clinked bottles and drank. George was right. The neighborhood had transformed into something better, not because of Patricia's removal, but because people had chosen to build something positive in the aftermath. "You know what the funny part is," George said. "Patricia was so worried about property values, and they've increased 15% since she left. Turns out people will pay more to live in a neighborhood where the HOA isn't run by a tyrant." "Property values aren't everything," I said. "No, but it's a nice bonus. Plus, it proves her whole justification was wrong. She claimed she was protecting the neighborhood, but she was actually hurting it." Marcus called a few days later with surprising news. Kevin, you remember that night I responded to Patricia's 911 call about your fire pit? Hard to forget. Well, I had to write up that call as a false report. It went into a database that tracks misuse of emergency services. Turns out Patricia had made similar calls before about other residents. The department is reviewing whether to charge her additionally for making a pattern of false reports. Is that really necessary? She already has a criminal record from the vandalism charges. Probably not necessary, but it's being reviewed. I thought you should know in case it comes up. I didn't hear anything more about additional charges, so I assumed the department decided against pursuing it. Patricia had faced consequences for her actions, and piling on more charges seemed excessive. Sometimes mercy is more important than maximum punishment. The monthly guest lectures at the academy became a highlight of my routine. I enjoyed working with new recruits, seeing their growth over the weeks and months of training. Several mentioned that my lessons had helped them in the field, handling confrontations or de-escalating tense situations. The HOA board work also proved rewarding. We handled disputes fairly, enforced rules consistently, and maintained open communication with residents. No one was afraid to install a fire pit or paint their door or plant new landscaping, because they knew they could check with the board and get a straight answer based on the actual covenant language. Margaret served as president for 2 years before deciding to step down. "I've done what I needed to do," she told the board. "The HOA is stable, transparent, and functioning well. Time for someone else to take the helm." The board asked me to consider becoming president, but I declined. I'm happy on the Architectural Review Committee. That's enough responsibility for me. Robert became the new president, and he continued Margaret's approach of balanced leadership. Cedar Grove's reputation as a well-run, resident-friendly community continued to grow. 2 years after the fire pit incident, I was at a police training conference in Houston when someone called my name across the convention hall. I turned to see a woman in her 30s approaching, wearing the uniform of a police lieutenant. "Sergeant Daniels. I'm Lieutenant Sarah Chen. You trained me about 12 years ago. I just wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "You probably don't remember me specifically, but you changed how I approached police work. You taught us that power is responsibility, not privilege. That lesson stuck with me through my entire career." "I'm glad it helped. Congratulations on making lieutenant. I wouldn't have made it without the foundation you and the other academy instructors provided. So, thank you." After she left, I thought about the ripple effects of teaching. Hundreds of officers I had trained were out there serving their communities, carrying lessons I had taught them. Some became instructors themselves, passing those lessons to the next generation. The impact multiplied exponentially, far beyond what I could directly achieve. That evening, sitting by my fire pit back in Cedar Grove, I reflected on the past 2 years. What had started as Patricia's misguided attempt to assert control had ultimately led to positive transformation, not just for me but for the entire community. The HOA functioned better. Residents were more engaged, property values had increased, and I had found purpose in retirement, serving on the board and continuing to teach at the academy. Sometimes conflict is necessary for growth. The friction Patricia created had forced everyone to examine assumptions and make changes. If she had never confronted me about the fire pit, the HOA might have continued under flawed leadership indefinitely, with residents quietly suffering under unreasonable rules and arbitrary enforcement. George wandered over, as he often did on pleasant evenings. We had fallen into a comfortable routine of sitting by the fire, drinking beer, and solving the world's problems through casual conversation. "You ever think about Patricia?" George asked out of nowhere. "Sometimes. Usually wondering if she's okay, if she learned anything from what happened. I heard through the grapevine that she's doing well in Dallas. Got a job with some corporate real estate company. Apparently, she's very good at property management when she's not drunk on power." "That's good to hear. Everyone deserves a second chance." "Very magnanimous of you, considering she tried to ruin your life over a fire pit." "She didn't try to ruin my life. She tried to enforce what she thought were important rules. Her methods were wrong, and she crossed serious lines, but I don't think she was evil. Just misguided and too used to getting her way. Still, you handled it perfectly, documented everything, stood your ground, but didn't escalate unnecessarily. Very impressive. I just did what made sense. 23 years of training officers teaches you how to handle conflict." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. The neighborhood was quiet except for distant sounds of kids playing and someone's music floating on the breeze. It was peaceful, ordinary, perfect. David Emerson stopped by with his kids for another s'mores session. This had become a weekly tradition, weather permitting. Sophie and Lucas loved roasting marshmallows and running around the yard. Rachel usually came too, and we'd talk about gardening or neighborhood events or nothing in particular. "Kevin," Rachel said that evening, "I wanted to ask your advice about something. I'm thinking about running for the HOA board. Do you think that's a good idea?" "Absolutely. You're organized, you care about the community, and you've got good ideas. Why wouldn't it be a good idea?" "I just don't want to end up like, the previous board president, getting too caught up in power and rules." "That won't happen. You're already asking the right questions and thinking about it the right way. Patricia's problem was that she never questioned herself or her motives. She was convinced she was always right. You're clearly not like that." Rachel did run for the board and won easily. She brought fresh energy and perspective, along with ideas for family-friendly events and programs. The board became younger and more diverse, reflecting the changing neighborhood demographics. 3 years after the fire pit incident, Marcus Webb was promoted to sergeant and offered a position as a training instructor at the academy. He called me immediately with the news. "Kevin, I got it. I'm going to be a full-time instructor." "That's fantastic, Marcus. Congratulations. You're going to be great at it." "I hope so. I keep thinking about all the lessons you taught me, trying to figure out how to pass them on to the next generation." "Just be yourself, and remember why you became a cop. The rest will follow." Marcus invited me to his first day of teaching, and I sat in the back of the classroom watching him lead a session on de-escalation techniques. He was natural, confident but not arrogant, clear in his explanations, patient with questions. I felt a surge of pride watching him. This was the next generation of instructors, trained by people I had trained, carrying forward the same values and methods. After class, Marcus introduced me to the recruits. "This is retired Sergeant Kevin Daniels, the best defensive tactics instructor the academy ever had. Everything I know, I learned from him and the other instructors he trained." One recruit raised her hand. "Sergeant Daniels, what's the most important thing to remember about police work?" I thought for a moment. "Remember that you're a guardian, not a warrior. Your job is to protect and serve, not to dominate and control. Power without accountability corrupts everyone eventually. Stay humble, keep learning, and never forget that the badge is a responsibility, not a privilege." The same lesson I had taught hundreds of times, in hundreds of ways, over 23 years. The same lesson Patricia had failed to learn about her HOA position. The same lesson that applied to any position of authority. That evening, my fire pit burned bright as usual. I had stopped thinking of it as the thing that caused so much trouble. Now it was just a fire pit, a tool for cooking and warmth and gathering, nothing more or less. The drama it had sparked felt like ancient history. Jennifer Morrison called unexpectedly a few days later. "Kevin, I wanted to give you an update. Patricia Hendrickson's probation ended last month. She completed all requirements, paid all restitution, and from what I hear, she stayed out of trouble completely." "That's good to hear. Thanks for letting me know. I thought you'd want to know. Successful rehabilitation is always worth noting. She made mistakes, faced consequences, and apparently learned from the experience. That's how the system is supposed to work." After we hung up, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Patricia had served her time, both literally through probation and metaphorically through the destruction of her reputation and position. She had paid for her mistakes and moved on. The chapter was finally, truly closed. 4 years after the fire pit incident, Cedar Grove celebrated its 50th anniversary as a community. The HOA organized a huge block party with food, music, games, and a historical display showing the neighborhood's evolution over 5 decades. Hundreds of residents attended, from longtime residents like George to new families who had just moved in. I helped organize the event as part of my board duties, coordinating with vendors and volunteers. It was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely worth it. Seeing the community come together, celebrating their shared home, reinforced everything we had worked to build over the past 4 years. During the event, someone had the idea to light a communal bonfire in the park area near the community center. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the fire pit story. Margaret came over grinning. "Should we check the HOA covenant first?" "Already did," I replied. Section 12, Paragraph 4, Subsection C specifically allows community bonfires with proper safety measures and fire department notification. Of course you did. Some habits never change. The bonfire was a huge success. Families gathered around it as evening fell, roasting marshmallows and hot dogs, singing songs, telling stories. It became the centerpiece of the celebration, a symbol of community and warmth. Standing there watching the flames and the happy faces around them, I thought about how far we had all come. From conflict and division to cooperation and community. From a HOA run by fear and control to one based on transparency and mutual respect. From my simple desire to use a fire pit to this gathering of hundreds of neighbors sharing warmth and friendship, Marcus attended the celebration with his wife and young daughter. "This is amazing, Kevin. You've built something special here." "Not me. The community built it. I just helped remove some obstacles." "Don't sell yourself short. Leadership matters. You showed people how things could be different." Maybe he was right. Maybe standing up to Patricia had done more than just resolve my personal issue. Maybe it had shown other residents that challenging unfair authority was possible, that communities could change for the better, that one person refusing to back down could make a difference. 5 years after the fire pit incident, I sat in my backyard on a mild spring evening, fire crackling in the pit, a good book in my lap. George was there, along with David and Rachel and their kids, now older and more independent. Marcus stopped by after his shift. Margaret brought wine. A dozen neighbors gradually filtered in, drawn by the fire and the company. We talked about nothing important and everything important. Kids' schools and job frustrations and home improvement projects and neighborhood gossip. The stuff of everyday life, the ordinary moments that make up a community. As I looked around at the gathering, I realized this was why I had fought Patricia's fines and harassment. Not because of principle or stubbornness, though both played a role. But because I had wanted exactly this, the freedom to gather with neighbors, to build relationships, to create a life worth living in a community worth preserving, the fire pit had been a catalyst. But it was never really about the fire pit. It was about whether one person could dictate to everyone else based on personal preference rather than actual rules. It was about whether a community would be built on fear and control or trust and cooperation. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult and uncertain. Patricia had provided the conflict, but the resolution came from everyone who chose cooperation over control, transparency over secrecy, community over personal power. The Cedar Grove that existed 5 years later was better because of that choice, better because residents had decided to build something positive rather than just accept the status quo. My phone buzzed with a text from one of the recruits I had lectured to a few months earlier. "Sergeant Daniels, just wanted to let you know I used the verbal de-escalation techniques you taught in a domestic dispute situation today. Everything worked perfectly, no one got hurt, and the situation resolved peacefully. Thank you for the training." I showed the text to Marcus. "That's what it's all about," he said. "Training that saves lives and makes a difference." "That's what everything is about," I replied, "making a difference one interaction at a time." The gathering around my fire pit continued into the evening. Kids roasted marshmallows. Adults laughed and told stories. The fire burned warm and bright, exactly as it was supposed to, causing no problems for anyone, serving its purpose perfectly in the end. That's all I had ever wanted. A peaceful retirement, a welcoming community, and the freedom to enjoy a simple fire without drama. It had taken conflict and confrontation to achieve it, but the result was worth every difficult moment. The flames danced higher as someone added more wood. Sparks spiraled up into the dark sky, disappearing among the stars. Around me, my neighbors talked and laughed, comfortable and content. This was home. This was community. This was what I had fought for and what we had all built together. And somewhere in Dallas, I hoped Patricia had found her own peace, her own community, her own chance to start fresh and build something better. Everyone deserves that opportunity. Everyone deserves redemption. The fire burned late into the night, warming us all.